Hey folks, Ardwulf here. Today we're going to have an unboxing of a new edition of Soviet Dawn. Now, you may recall that I brought you a playthrough series, which I think ran to 4 or 5 videos a few years ago of the previous edition of Soviet Dawn. This has been through the hands of at least 3 different publishers now that I'm aware of, and this is where it has most recently landed with Worthington Games. Now, the original edition was released by Victory Point Games. Victory Point Games doesn't really do war games anymore, as far as anybody can tell. A second edition was included in an issue of C3I magazine, and it was nice, but it was subject to the limitations of the magazine game format. So we have a nice big full boxed edition of Soviet Dawn here from Worthington, which has just arrived. So we're going to take a look at what's inside. Now, the subject of the game, if you haven't seen, I'm not going to do a comparison between the contents of the last edition. If you want to see those contents, go watch my playthrough video. And they're not super long either. And it's a pretty engaging game about the Russian Civil War, 1918 to 1921, and it is a solitaire game. It uses the, at this point, very well-established states of siege solitaire mechanism, where you sort of have a central pole around which everything revolves, and you have to defend that central spot from a number of different avenues. So some people call this tower defense. I'm not sure how well that corresponds to what you'd think of as tower defense for like a video game. There are tower defense video games, of which I have played 0. So I don't know how versatile that terminology is, but I have heard the states of siege mechanism described that way. Now, a number of games do some interesting things with that. Some games say you have to expand first and then you have to defend. That's not like this. In this case, the red capital of Moscow is under siege from all fronts, including by the whites, and the southern front, and from Poland, and from Finland, and the Allies. Even the Americans sent troops to this, by the way, just not very many. They weren't very effective. So I have very high hopes for the component quality here, because I have, generally speaking, in fact every time, have been extremely pleased with the component quality out of Worthington Games. And I've played this before, I'll play it again. It's a topic I'm particularly interested in. And it is in, I think, a pretty standard Worthington box, but I would say it's close to 2.5 inches. So let's open her up and, ooh, look at that. That's very fancy. This is obviously Lenin addressing the red masses inside the box cover. That's pretty slick. All right, we have a scoring pad, very interesting, very handy as well. Feels like there's, I don't know, 20 or 30 of these. I'd photocopy that before touching the pad personally. All right, so the first thing we have is a rule book. It is a glossy paper, full color, obviously. It feels like about 26 pages. 24 pages, pretty close. Now, this is, the states of siege mechanism is generally relatively simple. Although some are more complicated than others. This is 24 pages of pretty large print. I'm not really an expert on states of siege games, to be honest, but I feel like this is maybe a hair more complicated than the other ones that I've seen, but I could be full of it too, so don't trust me on that. In any event, only about 12 pages of this is actual rules, and the that part of the rulebook onward is pretty much an example of play. Here's some optional rules. There was an expansion originally released by Victory Point Games for this, which was the case for a number of their early states of siege games. We've got a bunch of historical background. That's great as well for those who don't know all this material already. I won't say that I know all this material already, but I have done some reading and extra research on this particular topic. So, nice looking rule book. We have some counter sheets, at least one counter sheet. Okay, and this is, this isn't a counter heavy game, and I want to say this is all the pieces that's in this thing, other than cards and stands. And oh, look at this thing. This is very fancy. I do not believe I have seen this kind of insert from the fine folks at at Worthington Publishing so far. So you've got a sort of blow-molded plastic box with a lid that doesn't snap onto it, so you're kind of depending on the weight of it to hold everything in that tray. And bluntly, unless you put a cardboard spacer in here, the materials in the box are not going to do it. So Slightly disappointing. I am pretty sure this isn't a bespoke tray design. So it's nice that it's included, but the reason they include baggies is you're going to have to put the pieces in baggies inside this tray anyway. So that's a little bit disappointing. There's cards as well. We'll take a look at the cards. And these are plastic. There's 1d6, which is all you need for this, and a bunch of plastic stand-ups for the various things. So if I'm not mistaken, to represent the progress on each of the incoming tracks, and we'll look at the board in a minute. And some of these will have backsides too that do different things. You can use either these discs, or you can use these stand-ups for Pilsudski, Denikin, who's of course a noteworthy individual, Mannerheim, another noteworthy individual, Udenovich. Here's the token for the Tsar. Here's Semyonov. So I think all of these rectangular pieces are intended to be standoffs. These are stand-ups. These are intended to be markers. And then you can disorganize, I believe, the fronts too, to the best of my recollection. It has been a couple of years. And then the numbers on these represent sort of the strengths of those fronts that you have to roll on your die to beat, to push them back. So looking at the board, this is if it's a standard board, it's a half-size standard board, okay? And I am pleased to report that it's got a sort of a fairly highly textured finish on the back. On this neoprene pad, this thing doesn't move at all. Lays dead flat right out of the box. That's always nice. I'm a little tired of hard-mounted maps that pooch and you have to put them under plexiglass anyway. So looking at the cards, and I want to say that in this particular States of Siege game, there are eras on the cards. Those are the numbers at the top. Or maybe that's not. I'm completely breaking down on this now. I don't really remember how the hell we played this thing at all. But there's a lot of cool history on these cards, and there were in the previous edition as well. No, I think there are 4 phases here. So there's 1, 2, 3, and 4. And they're all kind of mixed up. So photographs or paintings on the cards. This will tell you what track you're going to advance. So on this one, if you draw this card, you're going to advance the Baltic track. So that basically means that the track is going to start at the end. You're going to move it forward 1 space, and at any point, if one of the tracks leads its way into Moscow, you, the player, lose. So there are a number of additional mechanics here. These political decrees and reserve offensives, and there are these special Red Army reorganization abilities that you can use as well. And you also kind of track the status of the Great War to see if the Soviets bend over to the Central Powers or not in World War I, which is pretty cool. So the cards look good. They feel good. Frederick Karl abdicates the throne. Who's Frederick Karl? Brother to the Kaiser. Was elected as Prince of Finland in October of 1918. There's a piece of history I had no idea. Very interesting. Okay, German capitulation. Very good. Okay. So as cool as this tray is, I'm feeling like it's probably not... Oh, look at that. That kind of ripped away. I think that's not a problem. Cleaned up okay, I suppose. And it's a little rough, actually. Easy enough to fix that with a small pair of scissors, I think. Yeah, okay. So I've seen more perfect die cutting, but I'm certainly not going to make a fuss about it either. Yeah, there's some other ones with that same issue too. Kolchak. Not Kolchak the Night Stalker, other Kolchak. Kolchak got turned into the Reds by some people that didn't want to deal with him anymore. And his was not a happy end. Even more unhappy than Karl Kolchak. There's a lot of cool color in here. And it's a pretty easy game to play. It's got good narrative. But not in the same way as your the Hunters type of solitary games. It's a little more structured than that. I think a little more mechanical, which might sound weird because the Hunters, to take that example of a game of that style, is pretty mechanical, but it also is very evocative. which is, you know, why people like those kinds of games. We're going to have to bag all this up in this tray. That seems too bad. This is a, you know what, this is a thing I'd expect from older Phalanx games. I haven't had a game for Phalanx that was released any time in the last probably 15 or maybe even 20 years. So maybe not quite that long, but it's been a while. And that was the same thing. There was this sort of generic blow molded tray in the bottom of the box, and you nothing unless you just picked the box up and carried it carefully to the shelf and laid it down in exactly the same position. There was no way that all that stuff was going to not end up all over the inside of the box, whether there was a tray in it or not. So in that sense, the generic storage tray inside the box, unless it has some kind of lid that affixes, in that case that's different, and there are examples of that. The new version of Eclipse has component trays inside it with lids that like snap on, and it's I mean, you're also paying like $300 for that game, so there's that. You're paying for it. We'll put the extra baggies in here. If this video does appear in the mists of time, I'd like to thank you for watching it. Shout out to all the patrons of Ardwulf's Lair, if there are patrons of Ardwulf's Lair in that distant century. Thank you for watching the video, and until next time, happy wargaming. One of these days I'm going to do, that's why this particular unboxing may never see the light of day. One of these days I'm going to do like a completely unstructured unboxing where I just say, oh, fuck it, this is it, whatever this is. I don't think you're going to see the light of day of this video, folks, because this has been a disaster from a cinematography standpoint.